Hello everyone, and Shalom in Messiah the Branch. This is December 2015, and I would like to present a recap and expansion of my two previous studies on the solar calendar, parts 1 and 2, to explain further the purpose and determination of the equinoxes, both the spring and fall equinoxes, in light of Victor Hadaf's statements in 3 Answer Book, pages 11 through 12, and 13 Symbolic Code, where he speaks about the lunar Sabbath theory, the weekly cycle, and where he presents the basic truth of the Hebrew calendar that Moses was given, that is, the yearly and monthly or seasonal calendar that the Creator gave to Moses to determine the yearly feasts or the Moedim. These yearly Moedim were to be determined according to the instruction of Genesis 1:14, relating to the creation of the two great lights, greater light and lesser light, and that originally the purpose of the two great lights were to rule over the day exclusively and to rule over the night exclusively. The sun was not to be seen during the nighttime, of course, and the moon was not to be seen during the daytime in its original purpose, thus conflicting with the ordinance of the sun as it is today. We take it for granted concerning the moon being visible about half of the month in its different phases, but it was not the case in the Genesis account, in Genesis 1. First, I would like to ask the presence and the blessing of the Holy Spirit to attend this study and to attend each listener. So may it be. As we look at this sacred year feast chart by Victor Hadaf, we notice that the dominant role of the vernal equinox at the bottom of the chart. I will come back to this chart after I share a few other points that I want to present in a graphical way and further decode this interesting demonstration of how the feasts flow through the year based on the solar calendar. Today, it's very easy for us to determine what these times are, the equinoxes and the solstices that he has on his calendar. And it's very convenient for us just to go to an almanac, a printed almanac, or go to a website, which there are many, that present the March equinox and the September equinox in particular. This particular site is timeanddate.com, and there's a lot of information on it. It's very valuable, and you can stop this study at any time and read some of this information at your leisure, at your own speed, where it describes what the equinoxes are and what they're not, and what they're based on. Some of these diagrams are very clear. You have to maybe study them for a few minutes to get a full idea of what they're presenting. And there are many of these images online which you can look up concerning the orbital motion of the Earth in relation to the Sun, which is very key to what Victor Hadaf presented in 3 Answer Book 11 and 12 in his feast chart. Before I go any further, I would like to present a brief video, kind of baseline information to consider accepted knowledge of the operation of the 4 seasons. Most of you are probably very familiar with this, but some may not be. So just so that everybody's up to speed on this and on the different on the equator in relation to the equinox and the two tropical zones above and below the equator. So this is just a little over 2-minute video, so it's very brief. There are many other videos like this on YouTube, which you can find if you so desire any further knowledge on it.
Hello, I'm Milo for About.com, and today we're talking about the 4 seasons. Since the Earth is not only rotating around the Sun in a yearly cycle, but is tilted on its axis relative to the solar Earth plane at 23.5 degrees, the Sun's rays strike the Earth at different points, causing temperatures and daylight to change cyclically as well. We call these cyclical changes seasons. They are spring, summer, autumn, and winter. These cycles in the Earth's temperature and daylight are more distinct in certain parts of the Earth. These places are near 2 important latitudes, the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. So obviously, these changes in the seasons do not happen simultaneously in the northern and southern hemispheres. Actually, seasons in the northern hemisphere occur at opposite times of the year than in the southern hemisphere. The solstices and the equinoxes are connected with the seasons. The seasons begin at the time of the solstice or equinox. The solstices occur around June 21st and December 20th, but not necessarily exactly on those dates. They are known as the June and December solstice, and each one marks the beginning of the winter or summer season, depending on whether you are in the northern or southern hemisphere. During the solstices, the rotation of the Earth brings it to the peak of the Sun's rays, hitting either the Tropic of Cancer in the northern hemisphere or the Tropic of Capricorn in the southern hemisphere. At this peak, the Earth's rotation and tilt begins to move the Sun's rays back in the other direction, towards the equator and beyond. During the June solstice, the rays of the Sun hit the Tropic of Cancer directly. During the December solstice, the Sun's rays hit the Tropic of Capricorn directly. People living near those lines in the globe will be in summer during those times, and people living in the opposite lines will be in winter. The equinoxes occur around March 21st and September 21st, but again, not exactly on those dates either. During the equinoxes, the rotation and tilt of the Earth causes the Sun's rays to hit the equator directly. These times mark the middle, more or less, of the Earth's rotation between the solstices as it moves the Sun's rays towards the next peak mentioned before. The vernal equinox marks the beginning of the spring, and the autumnal equinox the beginning of autumn. For more excellent and helpful information on practically anything, check us out at About.com.
Now, before I go any further, I would like to introduce you to a term that is a Hebrew word in the Old Testament, the term of Tekufa. I'm not going to go through this today. I will go through this very short study in a separate video right after this one, which will be posted in a day or two after this one is posted. It's very straightforward and very simple, but I just want you to be aware of that term, Tekufa, and what it means in the determination of the feasts, the yearly feasts, and the beginning of months, and the fall feasts as well, autumnal equinox. Very quickly, the word Tekufa means the turn of the year, or the turn of days. There happens to be, or a completion of a circuit every year, or there happens to be 4 of those circuits every year, 2 equinoxes and 2 solstices. But the main one, of course, is the vernal equinox, which Victor Hoddef states here in 3 Answer Book, page 11, that the year itself is controlled or marked or initiated by the vernal equinox here, which he calls the immovable signpost. And that's important to keep in mind. Now, getting back to my question, or at least presenting the question, how did the ancient observers, certainly before the time of the conveniences we have today in the internet and in printed information, how did they determine when the equinox was, especially the spring equinox? What was the secret? What was the simple way? Because it had to be simple. They didn't have, I don't know if there's any evidence that they even had a water clock at the temple in Jerusalem. It's my understanding that they made all their determinations of the feasts based on the movements or the apparent movement of the sun, primarily. Although Brother Hodif does state in 13 Symbolic Code in his study, three-part study, that the Hebrews did interject the lunar cycle sometime after Moses. No, and he says nobody knows when, as I covered in my last video, and that we're not to follow their unscriptural example. That is in my study, the Genesis Clock, that actual statement. In fact, his whole study on the calendar in 13 Symbolic Code 9 and 10. But how did they determine which new moon, since they were using that at the time, how did they determine which new moon and when was the beginning of the year? Because the Hebrews did understand what Victor Hodif has presented here as far as the immovable signpost that he calls it, the vernal equinox. How did they make that determination? In fact, how did all cultures around the world make that determination? Because it was known pretty much universally. I would say absolutely universally. Different cultures had different ways of determining the seasons of the year by these 4 points, these equinoxes and the solstices. It was critical that they understood these times because their whole agricultural way of life was based on it. And if they didn't know and didn't plant at the right time, they wouldn't get a harvest, or they wouldn't be able to reap in the right time before winter came in. So this was universal, and there's many images online that you can look at of different places around the globe, and there's many of them, such as Stonehenge in England and Woodhenge and different places in South America and Africa, even the USA, prehistoric USA, and Europe as well, England, Ireland, Germany in particular. They had different ways of determining these 4 points of the year. But they would have to know when those times were getting close so they could be watching for their markers. Oftentimes they would use just geographical markers, rocks. There's one in California that early Native Americans used. That's just a natural feature, and it was set up in such a way that they could determine the seasons of the year based on the where the sun would be seen, which is how a structure like Stonehenge in England was utilized. I have some pictures of that I'm going to share here. So, but just to give you a graphical astronomical understanding of this, here is a representation. It's not moving at the present. I'm going to start it here in a minute. Time is frozen on this screen. But you'll notice this line, this white line going across the screen. And that's the absolute horizon line based on the curvature of the Earth. If I put the actual natural horizon in at night, it looks like this. Or during the daytime. Hold on here. Just to show the daylight. which I guess it has to be running, or rather it's not sunrise yet. So the green line, again, as I explained on the previous video, is the line of the ecliptic. You don't, of course, don't see that at night, but it's put in this program to show the path of the sun, moon, and planets in our solar system, which always are very close or on that green line every night, if you could actually see the line. And of course, the blue lines are the very basic outlines of the 12 major constellations, as I showed in the last video. So I'll start this running, and you'll see it's now about 3 o'clock in the morning. It's running 300 times faster than normal. The little dots that move across the screen are satellites, which this program also shows. Hundreds and hundreds of satellites. Now we're getting very close to sunrise. I'll make sure daylight is activated here. And it's starting to get daylight now. I'm going to take away the natural horizon and show the absolute horizon. This is again showing, I just stopped it for a moment. This is again showing the date of March 20th, 2016, 300 times normal speed of the lunar cycle, the solar cycle, daily solar cycle. And as you can see, the sun is going to pass right over the east mark, the mark of the eastern, exact eastern mark of the horizon on this program, which it does every year without fail on the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox. Twice a year it'll do this. Not only will the sun rise directly due east, the center of that sun disk is going right over the east, the eastern azimuth of the true compass. And these are these directions, east, north, east, south, and west. These are true compass directions, not magnetic. Now, it's well understood in archaeology that the ancient people knew these cardinal points of the compass, even though they probably didn't have compasses. And if they did, they only had a compass that would, a lodestone or something put in water, that was naturally magnetic, that always lined up with the north magnetic pole. But more than that, what the ancient people did, as they did in different archaeological sites around the world, which are called basically archaeoastronomy, there's another term for it, where they would note the cycle of the sun every year going back and forth across the horizon, across the eastern horizon primarily, throughout the different seasons of the year. And they would note the extreme northern position of the sun, like in the wintertime at the solstice, and the extreme southern position of the sun in the summer solstice. That is viewed from the northern hemisphere of this planet, of course. So when we look at this and we see the sun is rising directly due east and will set directly due west when it sets. Now I have the western sky visible here, and I'll turn up the speed of this to show it's going through the day now. Let me put the natural horizon in, so you get a little better feel for what the sun is doing. Then I'll take away the natural horizon just before sunset, so you can see where the sun actually sets according to the cardinal points of the compass, this one facing due west. Getting close to sundown. I need to slow this down now. Taking away the horizon. Coming near sundown, the sun is aiming for direct due west in its setting. And again, like I said, this happens twice a year, at the autumnal equinox and the vernal equinox. Now it's nighttime, or sundown anyway. And that white line again is the absolute horizon, as if you were out at sea, and it's a total flat horizon. And this is how the Creator, even in after sin came in, gave us the ability to never lose track of time, just like Victor Houteff said in Three Answer Book 11:12, that this cardinal point, these two cardinal points of east and west, become our immovable signpost of when the equinoxes tell us the beginning of the year, and in the autumnal equinox, the beginning of the 7th month. Those are the two critical times a year we must know to keep the feasts: the 1st month and the 7th month, Passover and Feast of Trumpets, or the count at beginning of countdown from to Passover in the spring from the vernal equinox. 14 days after the vernal equinox. I'm running it backwards now, and the sun is always in one of these constellations, just the way the moon is, or was, in its original purpose and operation. This determination of the equinoxes could be done today without any computers, without a calendar, without any computer-generated tables or anything. If you had the ancient people, sometimes all they would do is just place sticks in the ground. As I said before, the extreme southern motion of the sun every year, which marks the winter solstice and the winter solstice, and then the extreme northern motion of the sun every year, marking the summer solstice around June 21st. And they would put one stick as primarily a reference point, usually oftentimes a log, something very sturdy and buried in the ground, and use it as a reference point, and then put the other stick where the sun stopped going northward or stopped going southward year by year. And they divided those 2 points, and right in the middle of those 2 points, the 2 points of the 2 solstices, they knew that would be the cardinal direction for east or west, and that would be exactly where the sun would come up every year, both spring and fall, and set spring and fall in the west. So we could still do that today, but there's no point doing it with our modern conveniences. But this is how they determined it. And since, for instance, the temple in Jerusalem would have been oriented according to cardinal compass points, they would have certainly known this back then, especially the Hebrews. Just like the great pyramids of Giza are oriented exactly to the cardinal points of the compass, because the Egyptians used this practice in their major buildings to know when the seasonal changes would come, both the solstices and the equinoxes, but mainly the equinoxes. And if you had a building such as the temple in Jerusalem, which was a very tall building, probably 8 stories to 10 stories, but it was quite large, just the way the shadows would move on the southern facing walls of that temple would tell the priests when the equinoxes were getting close. Just the shadows alone, just like a sundial works. The building itself was possibly a giant sundial, and they certainly had some form of time telling based on a sundial or a large structure. If something was straight up and flat. Now, as a modern example of this principle, you can go online and you can look up these images. They're easy to find. It gives you a whole series of them. It's a fact that all major cities in the USA and all major cities in probably most countries, but certainly in the USA, all major streets are oriented to true cardinal compass points, east, west, north, and south. It's an interesting phenomenon in New York City in particular, since they have a eastern horizon that's flat, since it's all ocean toward the east, that on the days of the equinox, as you can see these images, the sun will be seen early in the morning coming up directly between the very tall buildings. This is the very same principle that the Stonehenge in England is based on, and many other structures all around the world. In Europe, South America, Central America, all these ancient observers knew this principle. I'll show a blow up of this one. That one's at sunset. One of them actually says, this one's at solstice. That would be looking that it would look something like this. That's a small image, but you can get the idea. And that's typical. So the New Yorkers know when the equinoxes come around. Because the sun will only show up in that particular location between those buildings on that one day of the year. But we can do the same thing using sticks in the ground, or a place in England called Woodhenge, or in other places around the world and the United States that you can find on YouTube. In particular, the use of the Stonehenge works in the same principle, where at certain times of the year, particularly the solstices, that seems to be more of a celebration point for pagan religions that were in England, 3,000 years ago. But this one is, hold on here, got the wrong one. This is a good one. This one actually says spring equinox at Stonehenge. And they knew, hold on here, get a larger image if I can. They knew when the sun would come up and between which stones the sun would come up on one particular day of the year, 2 days actually, spring and fall. And it's the same principle that the priests of Israel at the temple would use. They knew exactly where the sun would come up on one day of the year, due east, and then set due west only on those 2 days of the year. There are many images like this. And it's called archaeoastronomy. How these people without any electronic means or books could determine these important times of the year, rather the 4 seasons of the year. Now, before I go back to Victor Hada's feast day chart, I would like to just touch very lightly on this calendar that was produced by the Essene Jews, the Essene Hebrews in Israel about 2,000 years ago in the area of the Dead Sea. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, they were put away, and only Catholic translators and Catholic scholars had access to them until about 20 years ago, when a copy of them, which was not supposed to be released to the public, was being shared. I'll read that in a minute. And it was released to the public. So the Israeli Antiquities Authority had to release it in a formal release to all the universities and to the public at that point. This particular rendition of the Dead Sea Scroll calendar was shared with me from a friend up in Chicago who is a structural engineer, who was very interested in the calendar and determined that the Essenes, one sect of the Jews, did use a 30-day calendar month for their repeating years, and used the moon cycle in a different way, not to determine the months, but to determine the priestly cycles at the temple, the priesthood rotation throughout the year. This particular calendar has a lot to explain. I don't fully understand it, but I'm just showing it, presenting it here to show that it is a 30-day calendar month. All of the ones for each of the 6 or 5 years that she gave me the attachments for look exactly like this. I would like to read her comments. Her name is Sherry Freeland. A few of her comments. She sent me all these attachments, and all of them are essentially identical as far as being 30-day calendar months. The Hebrews, or the priests, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Jerusalem did not use this calendar. They continued on with the what we would call a solar lunar calendar today, until this very day. But she said that the Israel Antiquities Department suppressed the publication of these scrolls for something close to 50 years. They were finally published about 20 years ago. Some think that the Israeli scholars, headed by a Catholic scholar, was done because the Qumran community, that's the Dead Sea area, was thought to have messianic leanings, or may have accepted the Messiah Yeshua. And apparently, according to this friend and her research, the Catholic scholars did not want that to become common knowledge about the messianic believers in the Dead Sea area at the time, the Essene community. These scrolls, as I said, were discovered in 1947, and it was the greatest discovery of all modern times, of all biblical archaeology. It was very well covered in the Biblical Archaeology magazine and other magazines, peer journals of the time. And it was quite a story 20 years ago when the Israeli Antiquities Commission had to release these finally. She goes on to say the Qumran community used a solar calendar of 30-day calendar months. So far, even the solar calendar is not perfect or not applied correctly, and I agree with that. It's not a perfect calendar. It may be that we are not to have a perfect calendar yet, but this should not deter us from getting as close as we can. We are not really able to handle the blazing truth yet on many topics. The release of the DSS, or the Dead Sea Scrolls, about 20 years ago was due to a California University copy for scholars only, which was released without permission, forcing the publication of the scrolls from the Israeli DSS Research Committee. Now, just a quick comment here from Brother Roden, Ben Roden. He said in one of his studies, and I'll quote that in a future study. It's been a while since I read it, but he states that we cannot have a perfect calendar at this time. And he warns against those who say they're presenting or going by a perfect calendar. There is no such thing. But we can go by the principles introduced by Victor Houteff and carried on in the branch today, at least, as recognized by Ben Roden in a couple of his statements. But Victor Houteff is the main source of information on that, to give us the baseline truth on what the calendar is and what it was, or should be, and what it was in Moses' time. She finishes her comment here. The main and obvious flaw, hold on here. This probably will not go down to the bottom of the page, at least the screenshot, so I'll just read it all. The main and obvious flaw in the purely lunar calendar is there were no moon phases prior to the flood, and no one can prove otherwise. Not a word in Genesis about a moon cycle or a synodic cycle, that's the lunar cycle, a synodic cycle, that's an astronomical term, of 29.5 days, or a moon that wanes and waxes over the course of a month. There is reference only to a lesser light, and apparently this lesser light was self-luminescent, and in a much larger orbit, or much farther out from the Earth, always on the dark side of the Earth, always 180 degrees opposite of the Sun, which makes it a perfect timepiece, not only nightly, but monthly, as a kind of minute hand of a clock, showing its position against the Mazzaroth, or the constellations, the 12 major constellations, which the moon also moves through nightly and monthly. In this system, one could easily tell the time of night with the moon, just as the sun can tell you the time of day, unlike the moon is doing today. Now, the sun, you could tell the time of the day with the sun without even a sundial. If you knew where the southern point of the compass is, and you just faced south, and you could just use your arm to point to the sun, and at about 45 degrees angle every morning and every afternoon, that's the third hour, or the end of it. And on the other side of noon, 45 degrees from noon or 45 degrees from the horizon, either one works, you have the ninth hour, the conclusion of it. I believe, yeah, it's the conclusion of the ninth hour as well. So the priests in the temple um, when the temple was in operation in Jerusalem, would know when the daily times were without any kind of a clock, just by referencing the sun where it is in reference to the southern sky. You're facing south, because in the northern hemisphere the sun is always making a curved path across the sky toward the south every day throughout the year. If you were in the southern hemisphere, it'd be just the opposite. So she goes on to say here, the moon had its own light and was in perfect sync with the sun or solar calendar. But because, of course, and everything changed at the flood, because when sin entered, something happened to the moon, and we can understand that clearly today, because it's not performing its ordained movement and task of ruling only the night and being able to tell time at night, consistently, night by night. Now, to finish up, one key point here, I mentioned it briefly in my previous video, but I want to emphasize it. As you can see, the outer ring here on Victor Houghton's rendition of the true calendar, which he said in 13 Code 9 and 10, was solar, not lunar. He says that exact statement. And I quote him in my study, the Genesis Clock, with that statement, that the Creator's time here in the 13 Code 9 and 10, I quote all of it. He says here at the bottom of page 5 on my study, he says in Daniel 7:25 and 12:7, also in Revelation 12:14, times and a dividing of time, 3.5 years, are interpreted in Revelation 12:6, 13:5 to be 1260 days or 42 months, 30 days to a month. Heaven's way of measuring time is therefore not lunar, but solar. So we can't have a lunar solar calendar today for the feasts. We can have a solar calendar because it tells us everything. But that second witness in the sky has been affected by sin. Originally, as he says here in this next little paragraph, he says, when God created the moon, he appointed it to rule the night, not the day. Not the moon alone, therefore, but both the sun and the moon jointly he appointed for signs and for seasons, for days and for years, Genesis 1:14. And that was the way it was in the beginning. Now, getting back to the chart, since you have a basic understanding now how the vernal equinox was determined by observers 2,000 years ago, and any time before we had printing and common knowledge of astronomy and the internet, we can see how at the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox the sun would rise in the east and set in the west on those 2 days of the year only. And Brother Houghton is showing how this outer solar circle, that all the feasts are tied directly to that outer circle, not to the inner circle of the lunar months. That's just a representation and a reference point for our modern calendar, to show that the modern calendar, be it the Gregorian calendar or any other calendar for civil use or commercial use, is not in harmony with the Creator's calendar, based on the two immovable sign points of the vernal equinox and the autumnal equinox. You can see how each sacred month, by these large numerals on the inner ring, which are still part of the outer ring, are reflecting solar times. As he starts the first month directly on the vernal equinox 10 days later, the lamb is separated, and lamb is slain the end of the 14th day, beginning of the 15th here. And the various dates of sacred history fall into line thereafter. Here, the Gospel Pentecost is right here on time at the third month, and the ceremonial Pentecost is on the other side. So this count of the various months on this chart are sacred time. They're not based on a combination of lunar time and solar time, but solar time only, month by month. And he has drawn this very brilliantly in a very proportional way to show how to emphasize the sacred times, and then the other times of the year that there aren't any feasts. Nothing is listed there. So please carefully study this chart and understand its details and what it's saying and what it's not saying. It's the foundation for determining true time for the feast today. I'll close with that thought for this recap. And as I said, I'll have a separate, very brief study on the Tekufa within the next couple of days, which will be listed here on the Branch Ensign channel on YouTube, in connection with my 2 posts last week. I do have one video here on the Equinox, which I don't know if I included my Tekufa study on that in that video. It's been over a year that I posted that, but it's important to watch that one too, right after you before or after you look at the study on the Tekufa cycle in the Hebrew cycle of sacred time. I thank you for your attention, and I'll talk to you again on the next video. Thank you, and Shalom in Messiah, Yeshua.